The monitors screamed before anyone else did. A thin, jagged line spiked across the screen, then dropped like a falling star, dragging the room into a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Seraphina Vance, the woman who had built an empire worth billions, sat frozen in the hospital chair, her hand trembling as if it no longer belonged to her body. For a moment, even the doctors hesitated, because nothing about this made sense anymore. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected heroes, take a second right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echoes of Stories. Your support keeps these stories alive. Seraphina had everything the world promised success would bring: private jets, glass towers that carried her name, and a reputation that could bend markets with a whisper. But none of it could silence the quiet war inside her body. For months, an illness had been consuming her, something rare, elusive, and terrifyingly resistant to every known treatment. Specialists flew in from across continents. Laboratories ran experiments that cost more than entire neighborhoods. She spent over $100 million chasing a cure, each dollar a desperate plea to stay alive. And still, the answers slipped through her fingers like water. The hospital room became her world. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a bright daytime skyline, but the sunlight felt distant, as though it belonged to another life she could no longer touch. Machines surrounded her like silent witnesses. Every day brought new tests, new medications, new hope, and every night quietly took that hope away. The doctors spoke in careful tones, their optimism measured and rehearsed. They had begun to fear her case, not because it was impossible, but because it refused to follow any rule they understood. Seraphina was not afraid of losing her wealth or power. What terrified her was losing control. She had built her life on precision, strategy, and certainty. This illness gave her none of those things. It reduced her to waiting for results, waiting for relief, waiting for something to change. And waiting, she realized, was the one thing she had never learned how to do. Every morning, the same routine unfolded. Nurses adjusted her 4 lines, doctors reviewed charts, and assistants handled her endless stream of business decisions remotely. She refused to let her empire falter, even as her body weakened. But beneath that determination, cracks began to show. Her hands shook more often. Her voice grew softer. And sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, a shadow of fear crossed her face, raw, human, undeniable. Outside her room, unnoticed by most, worked a man named Idris Kaleem. He was a janitor, a single father who balanced long shifts with raising his 8-year-old daughter. His world was small compared to Seraphina's, but it was filled with a kind of quiet strength that came from surviving without safety nets. Idris had learned to observe, to notice details others ignored. It was how he managed everything in his life, by paying attention. He cleaned floors, emptied bins, and moved silently through the hospital corridors. Most people never saw him. To them, he was part of the background, like the hum of the machines or the echo of footsteps. But Idris saw everything. He noticed patterns, the way patients improved, the way some didn't, the way small signs often told bigger truths. It wasn't medical training, it was instinct sharpened by years of watching life unfold in its most fragile moments. One afternoon, while cleaning near Seraphina's room, he noticed something unusual. The door was slightly open, and inside, she sat with her arm resting on the chair's support. There was a faint discoloration near her wrist, something subtle enough that most would overlook it. But Idris paused. He had seen similar signs before, not in wealthy CEOs, but in patients who were being treated for something entirely different. He didn't say anything at first. Who would listen to a janitor? The doctors were experts, the hospital one of the best in the world. Still, the thought lingered. Over the next few days, he kept noticing it, the slight swelling, the way her fingers stiffened at certain moments, the almost imperceptible delay when she tried to move her hand. It didn't match the illness the doctors were treating. Idris struggled with himself. Speaking up could cost him his job. Staying silent could cost someone her life. He thought about his daughter, about the nights he stayed awake worrying if he was doing enough for her, if he was making the right choices. And then he realized, doing nothing was also a choice. The moment came unexpectedly. A group of doctors gathered in Seraphina's room, discussing yet another experimental treatment. Their voices carried a mix of urgency and frustration. Idris, standing nearby with his cleaning cart, felt his heart race. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. The room fell silent as he spoke. His voice was steady but hesitant, like someone stepping into a world they weren't invited to. He pointed out what he had seen, carefully, respectfully, aware of the weight of his words. At first, the doctors looked at him with disbelief. A janitor offering medical observations? It seemed absurd. But Seraphina, exhausted and desperate, didn't dismiss him. She looked at her hand, really looked at it, as if seeing it for the first time. Something shifted in her expression, not certainty, but curiosity. And in a case where nothing had worked, even curiosity was valuable. Reluctantly, one of the doctors agreed to run additional tests, if only to rule out the possibility. Idris stepped back, unsure if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life or the most important decision. The results came the next day. And they changed everything. The illness Seraphina had been treated for wasn't the real problem. It was a misdiagnosis, an incredibly rare overlap of symptoms that had fooled even the best specialists. The discoloration, the stiffness, the subtle signs Idris noticed, they pointed to a completely different condition. One that was not only treatable but manageable. The room that had once been filled with uncertainty now buzzed with a new kind of energy. Doctors revised treatment plans, nurses adjusted medications, and for the first time in months, hope felt real. Seraphina sat quietly as the news sank in, her mind struggling to catch up with the sudden shift from despair to possibility. And then her eyes found Idris. In that moment, the distance between them disappeared. She saw not a janitor, but a man who had done what no one else could. He had paid attention when it mattered most. He had seen her, not as a powerful CEO, but as a human being in need. Recovery wasn't instant, but it was steady. Day by day, Seraphina's strength returned. The tremors faded, the fear lifted, and the sunlight outside her window no longer felt out of reach. She began to walk again, to breathe without the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. But the greatest change wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something she couldn't measure in numbers or charts. For the first time in her life, she understood the value of something money couldn't buy: compassion, awareness, and the courage to speak up when it mattered. Seraphina didn't just thank Idris. She changed his life. She ensured his daughter's education was secured, gave him opportunities he had never imagined, and most importantly, treated him with the respect he had always deserved. But Idris remained the same at his core, humble, grounded, and quietly strong. Because for him, it was never about recognition. It was about doing what was right. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and comment. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest voice can make the biggest difference. Before we end, tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed a small act change someone's life in a big way? Seraphina returned to her world, but she was no longer the same person. She built not just companies, but initiatives that focused on overlooked workers, on giving voices to those who were often ignored. And every time she saw someone in the background, someone easily dismissed, she remembered the day her life was saved by a man no one thought to listen to. Because sometimes, the miracle you're searching for isn't found in million-dollar solutions or groundbreaking technology. Sometimes, it's found in the quiet observation of someone who simply cares enough to notice. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything.